interested in the Metaphysical University. Is that an online course, or is it an actual place, or what is the Metaphysical University, or where is it?
Very good questions. No one's ever asked me that before, but I went to the University of Metaphysics, and it is based out of Sedona, Arizona. So there is an actual physical location, but it is a distance learning, and it is one of the older universities. It was, I have my little cheat sheet over here, but it was established in 1959, and it was founded by Dr. Paul Leon Masters. And yeah, it's a distance learning. And I started, let's see, I got my bachelor's degree in 2011. And back then I had only anticipated on going that far because I knew something told me that I could connect a lot of dots if I studied metaphysics. And to be honest with you, when I first started down this path, I had probably never even heard of the word metaphysics. I didn't even know what that was. And so when I started studying, that's when almost like these memories started coming back of, oh, that's why I needed to go down this path and study this topic, because it started unlocking things that definitely did not come from the way in which I was brought up. It did not come from, I have a degree in marketing from the University of Pittsburgh, so it did not come from that type of education. And it certainly did not come from the corporate environment that I had spent, and I was actually still in the corporate environment when I started studying metaphysics. But none of the information that I was understanding from another aspect of myself came from anything that I could point to. And as soon as I started studying it, which happened intuitively, for some reason I decided to do it. I honestly can't even remember how it came about, but as soon as I started, it put me on a trajectory that now I'm sitting here across from you. And it took about 10 years for me to get to that point. I'm going on my 13th year now, but in order to get to the point where I could coherently and eloquently speak about what the heck happened to me, it was about 10 years.
So yeah, I'll just give you a breakdown of what I thought of your dissertation.
Okay, perfect.
I thought it was really, really good. What I liked about it was that it was extremely academic. And I think there's a lot of research in this area, which often is just, shall we say, speculative, but you sort of approached it more from a scientific perspective. But you also kind of included a more intuitive angle as well. So you've got this kind of juxtaposition, if you like, between the academic, but also the spiritual and the intuitive. It was extremely well written. It was very well structured.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that critique. Yeah, thank you.
Are you writing a book?
No, you are the second person that said I should turn this into a book.
Absolutely.
And I didn't even think of that. I actually didn't even have any aspirations of getting my master's. It just happened spontaneously, a couple years ago. And so because you're, encouraging that, and another friend of mine was encouraging that, I have been thinking of it more.
Well, I think it's an exceptional piece of research. And so it really does need to be looked at in more depth, in more detail. And I think some of the ideas that you're looking at can be expanded upon, but in a way which would be really, really beneficial. I actually think it would be very beneficial for this area of research, because a lot of the ideas and opinions that you're looking at are very similar to the ideas that I've been looking at within the Hidden Kingdom. And so I'm just wondering, when you initiated yourself into this material, did you find that supernatural things started to happen, or synchronicities? How did you find that in terms of your own life experiences?
When I started down the route of metaphysics, and I found myself, this is so hilarious when I think of it, on Monday nights. I have no idea how I felt this lady, but every Monday night I would leave, or maybe it was like a couple nights a month on Mondays. I would leave work a little bit early, and I would drive about an hour and a half in traffic to this lady's house. And she was an angel therapist or something like that. And she was a psychic medium. and I would sit among all these other women. I was the only corporate person there with my high heels, my designer shoes, my hair and makeup all done. I'm sitting around with massage therapists and nurses and artists, and total, between me and them, it was like hippie people and then this corporate person. It was hilarious. I was sitting there learning how to meditate, learning how to do all this psychic stuff that I knew about on a level that would be more pop culture, in movies and in TV shows. That was the only understanding that I have. And it's some of the stuff that this woman was teaching me. And so I'm sitting here learning how to meditate. And I remember at some point I looked around, I'm like, what the hell is going on? What am I doing here? I go from this very corporate environment to this hippie type environment. What is happening to me? But an aspect of me knew I had to be there. And that's the way my life has been ever since then, is I don't understand why I'm doing something until probably 6 months to a year after I'm already doing it. And I can look back and start connecting the dots. So when you talk about synchronicities, that is what guides me, is these physical cues that I get, the synchronicities from my environment, and just coming across people like you. Someone will just come into my life and they'll help me connect dots. They'll help me through an aspect of something that I'm working on that I maybe need answers on. And it's just the way in which I've become comfortable doing things, because from a corporate perspective, even though I worked on special projects that, we had to figure out as we would go, I was pretty much trained like that from a corporate perspective. Even though you had to figure those projects out as you went along, you still had to follow a structure. You had to do certain things. There was rules of engagement basically that you have to follow in a corporate environment. And, when you get outside of that corporate environment, you don't have this structure, especially when you're in these alternate types of realities or these metaphysical surroundings. And you do need to look at synchronicities. Well, I do. I look at synchronicities as technology. And I look at myself as a form of technology, my blood and bones. And anytime I get a synchronicity from the environment, I will pick up, my body will pick up on it differently. And I've taught myself, I've trained myself how to read those physical cues. And like I said, it took about 10 years to get to a point where I'm very comfortable in, when I get a certain cue, I know exactly what it means and I know what to do with it. But I had that 10-year of training, man, where it was like, I don't know what the heck's going on. I don't know what this means, but I'm going to keep doing it because I'll figure it out eventually.
Wow, that's yeah. So yeah, I mean, I follow synchronicity as well within my life in terms of just where I research, because I guess when I initially started writing The Murder of Reality, I kind of intended that, oh, well, I'll release a book every year or every couple of years, but it hasn't really worked out like that. First of all, the books are larger, but secondly, I've just done a lot of writing. And so there's just so much unpublished material that I have, which is really detailed and which is, to be honest, I've got about 7 books and they're all got new material in, which is extremely detailed. So I'm getting to the stage now where I'm thinking, well, I need to kind of focus and I need to try and edit this material and try and release more books. So this is kind of what I'm doing at the moment. I'm trying to get into a strict regime of writing, of eating well, of meditating, and just trying to get focused, but at the same time also not losing sight of life, because we've got to remember to have fun, don't we? Because this is a physical experience and we're human beings and we need to connect with our family. So it's getting that balance. But yeah, I think it's very interesting in terms of, have you had supernatural? Well, again, the definition supernatural could be problematic, but shall we say, have you had experiences which are outside of the mainstream or outside of the box?
Yes, So growing up, I never did. I did have one experience when I was very young. We lost our first pet. I had a dog, a Yorkshire Terrier. And I remember when I was very young, after she died, she used to sleep in bed with me. And I remember I was sleeping on my side, so my legs were tucked, tucked up. And I felt her get on the bed, this was after she died. I felt her do her circle like dogs do and then lay down. And like I've always had this other aspect of me that just knew things. It didn't scare me. And I remember saying, oh, that's Megan. That was her name. We had a little Yorkie named Megan. And that was it. That was the last time I ever felt anything like that. And I just instinctually knew that was her, and it was fine. And it was nothing to be afraid of. And then after that, for some reason, both of my grandparents, my maternal and my paternal grandpas, visited me in dreams after they died. And the first time it happened with my paternal grandfather, I was so young that I didn't understand what it was. And looking back, I know that that was a quote unquote visitation. Now with my maternal grandfather, he died in, goodness, 2014. So this was, I'm an adult at this point. I'm studying this stuff, so I can understand it from a more educated perspective. He did visit me in a dream, and it's so funny because in the dream, okay, so I'll start off. In the dream, I end up with him. He calls me on a cell phone, and I'm talking with him at first on a cell phone. And then the next thing you know, he's standing next to me, and he died with dementia. And I don't know if your listeners are familiar with people that have dementia. When they're in a facility, they're walking around, they'll shuffle their feet, because it's just a characteristic of when you have that type of disease, because they're afraid of falling. So to keep their balance, they shuffle their feet. So he's next to me walking, and he's shuffling his feet, and he's going in and out of that dementia state, which is what he did when he was alive. And I remember touching him to like, oh my goodness, you're here. What's going on? And he was wet. He was soaking wet, Pierre. And that made me angry because, like I said, another aspect of me knew he was stuck. And I'm getting like the goosebumps as I tell the story. And so I'm having this conversation with him, and he's telling me all these things. And like I said, he's going in and out. So he's being coherent, and then he's not being coherent, because he told me I was from Mars. And he didn't say we were from Mars. He said, you're from Mars. And I was like, whoa. I said, Grandpa, I'm from Earth. I'm on Earth. Then he switches gears, and he's like, oh, we're missing out on a family reunion. And I'm like, okay, whatever, and then he says that. And then the next thing he goes into, and he says, whenever you go to something like that, you are to make something and bring it, not buy it. And I was laughing in the dream because I thought, okay, this is really my grandfather, because I don't make things. When I go to parties, I will go buy like a cookie tray or a sandwich tray. I've even bought a pizza. I've bought a stack of pizzas before and brought them to a party. It was a big hit, by the way. So he knew me, like he definitely was telling me things that I could say, okay, he's spot on. And so I wake up from the dream. I call my mom the next morning, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? Grandpa came to visit me in a dream, and he's stuck. I swear to God, he's stuck. I told her all the details that I just told you. She's silent. And she's like, there's a problem. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? She said, he was buried in the wrong grave. Yeah. So I was like, oh, of all the things you could have done to this man, he died in a confused state. And now he's in this state. He doesn't know where his body is. And he died in the wintertime. They're in Pennsylvania. Once the ground freezes, they have to build a fire, to thaw the ground. It was just an ordeal. She's like, oh my God, I've got to get this fixed right away. I said, yeah, you do, because I need my sleep, and he can't be visiting me like this. And then, so I told her about, he had predicted that we were going to have a family reunion. Well, she didn't know anything about this. And I said, well, just look into it. That was a part where he went and slipped back into dementia. She calls me the next day. She spoke with his sister, and his sister's like, yeah, there is a family reunion. It's in the South, and it's it would be family members that he knew, that my mom and myself, I really don't know them. My mom kind of knows them, but she was like, yeah, there's actually a reunion this weekend, and you would not have known about it because it's however many states away. I think it was in Georgia. I was somewhere in the South, and we wouldn't have been invited anyway. And she only knew of it because she keeps in touch with them. So it was like, boom, boom, all of this information came through that I was able to confirm. And that is one aspect of how this stuff works with me. Not really a medium or a psychic or anything like that, but it seems like with my ancestors, I have a deep connection through the blood and bones. And I look at it as, we're quantumly entangled. If you guys, if the listeners understand what that means, because we share DNA, it's very easy for us to have conversations. And I do a lot of ancestral work. And that's basically where I learned a lot of what I write about, and what I've come to understand has been communicating with me all those years was a group of ancestors that, in a sense, graduated from this reality and have come back to teach me about this reality, but from not only the micro perspective, because as you stated, we are here, we are living here, we are earth seeds. We not only have to understand what it's like to be human in this reality, but my ancestors will pull me out and they'll have me look at this reality from a macro perspective. So I usually give the example of, if somebody pulled you out and set you on the moon and taught you about Earth and about the archetypes that engineer and construct this planet, and then how they drill in down from the macro all the way into the micro. And that's, in a sense, what I did with my master's thesis paper. Is I took a macro and a micro view, and I took the lead of my ancestors. And that's kind of how I operate and function, if that made any sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. The story about your grandfather reminded me of somebody who I knew called Mr. Tilvan. He had dementia, and I was good friends with him. But I mean, he was 80 years old at the time, and I was only mid-20s, late 20s. And he was extremely lonely. And I used to go and visit him and talk to him. And he was actually, he had been a very successful actor. He'd been in a TV series called Doctor Who. He'd been in Clint Eastwood film as well. He played a Russian general in Firefox. So anyway, I moved from London, and I didn't see him again. But I had this dream, and yeah, it was really interesting because he was on a train, and he got off, and he looked younger, probably about 50 years old, and not 80. And this was when he was very successful in his career. And I said to him, I'll walk home with you. I'll show you the way home, because in the dream, I thought he would get lost. And he said to me, I no longer need you to show me the way. I can find my own way back home. And yeah. And so
that was a good dream.
Yeah, that was a good dream. And I contacted the relatives, and at that time he was in a coma. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's like he came to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I was good friends with him, which was, yeah, he just lived downstairs from my flat. So that was kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, that was a lovely exchange that you had there. It's like he wanted to say goodbye. I love that story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shall we have a look at your thesis then? Or
oh yeah, definitely. That was a good, tie into it. I can share the screen. Let us get to the share. And I have the paper up as well, just in case if I have to go over and do a search for anything in particular.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I can do that. Let's see. All right, so there's about 19 slides here, and we're going to try and get through as many as we can. I was telling Pierre.
By the way, don't feel rushed. If you want to take your time and explain things, because I know what it's like. Once you prepare something, it's very difficult to kind of constrain it within time limits. And so
Yes.
just go with the flow and just take your time. As I said,
Okay.
we're not, we're not on the stopwatch here. So
Perfect.
okay.
Perfect. Yeah, because like I was saying to Pierre before we hit record, this is dense. I should say I didn't realize how dense the material was until I had to create presentations. And this is about the third presentation I've had to do. And this is the most in-depth that I've had to do. And I didn't even get through the entire paper. I tried to tweak this so that it would flow with your research, Pierre. And I have an example towards the end that's not in the paper, but it does bring together both of our research. And I think it's a wonderful example. So I am excited to get to that. Yeah. But anyway, so this is the title of the paper, The Hidden Predator, Deconstructing the Shadow Side of Reality. And this is the thought flow that I went through in order to pick that topic. Because the university that I went to is a distance learning, I didn't have a counselor. And the time that I decided to write the master's was 2019. And everybody was decided to write their master's then because everybody was dealing with what we all dealt with, having to be locked in. And the person, my point person at the university, was so inundated with working, trying to work through all of these people that wanted to work on their paper. She didn't have time for just one person. So I had to work all through this all by myself. And I put this slide in here in case if somebody else finds themselves in that, that particular situation. This is how my mind worked through everything. And I had to pick a topic that was within the curriculum. And so one of the topics was the metaphysical psychology of consciousness. And then I had to narrow it down from there. So another kind of subtopic within that main one was controlling archetypes. And then from there, I picked the shadow archetype of reality. And everyone should be familiar with Carl Jung. And these are the four major Jungian archetypes. There are 12 archetypes that are kind of sub-archetypes from there. But I just put this here to show everybody the predator would fall underneath the shadow, okay? And then this is the thesis statement. The portion that's highlighted in green bold is what pertains to, Pierre, your research. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just pluck some things out for everybody. Essentially what I do is I reveal the subtle predatory ruling intelligence that's embedded within the fabric of our reality. And that is something, the fabric of our reality is what I read that in your book. So we're both on that same wavelength of understanding this from a micro and a macro perspective. This predator, it does interact with us in dangerous and deadly ways, but that's not always the case for everybody. It can act as a catalyst for an evolutionary growth process of the mind, and it can usher you into another plateau of awareness, which is, a fancy way of saying a paradigm shift. It has the potential to shove you into a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift can be a little dark because you realize you're not at the top of the food chain. And I understand that saying something like that, it can be looked at as negative, but the way I approach it in the paper is from a self-defense perspective. I have a background in martial arts. I have a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo that I received when I was younger. And my family, I come from a family of black belts. And just recently, within the past year, I started studying jujitsu, and I have a white belt with one stripe in jujitsu. And so I think it's very important as not only a female, but to understand how to protect yourself both physically and metaphysically. And it's funny because I didn't realize that I was writing it from that aspect until a friend of mine read the paper, and he pointed out that this was written in a self-defense style. And as soon as he pointed that out to me, I was able to go back through the paper and tweak it to really follow that type of logic, so that once you read through it, you're not fearful, you feel more empowered, which is what self-defense does, is empower you to the point where you feel as if you could handle a situation, even if you're pushed, you know, into a paradigm shift, into a situation that's chaotic. Your mind is mentally strong, and to the point where it can then figure out the situation and survive it. And I'm actually curious, Pierre, did that come across? Did, you know, the self-defense aspect of it, was that pretty clear? Because I know I mentioned it in the beginning, and I kind of mentioned it at the end of the paper.
I guess the way that I look at it in terms of these predators is that they're very much like human beings. So because human beings cover the whole gamut between the very good to the very bad and everything in between. And I think it's sometimes very easy just to say, okay, well, they're negative or they're positive. But I think that there's a lot more subtlety and it's a lot more complex. And so I think I was getting a very similar angle from yourself on that.
Exactly. So before we go any further, I want to just define what I mean by the hidden predator. And this is directly pulled from the paper. It's an independent, invisible, non-material, non-human, ancient predatory intelligence. We could say race of being, we could say force of nature, and it shares the planet. It lives in a parallel reality, which Pierre talks about in his books, and it exhibits a high degree of social and psychological agency, which your research really goes into that aspect of it. Your research also covers the hierarchy and the defined rules of engagement that they actually established. And I have slides on those rules of engagement and how this predator uses archetypes, avatars, and licenses as technology, which that'll make sense later. And this predator appears to be governed by laws that supersede our human laws. And you can see that in the way that they interact with us. They can easily go back and forth between realities, and they can effortlessly take humans back and forth, which is perfectly seen within the Missing 411 book series that David Paulides curated. And then this is just the breakdown, the chapters. We've got the introduction where I touch upon the self-defense perspective. The review of literature is broken down into two sections, part 1 and 2. Part 1 is the macro description of how this archetype drills down into our reality. And I use the Missing 411 profile points to guide the entire paper, but it's heavily used within part 1. And I take those profile points and I compare them to case studies from the book Time Storms, written by Jenny Randles. And what's fascinating when you read his book series in conjunction with Time Storms is that the majority of Time Storms victims, I pretty much would say all of them, survived their encounters. Now, the Missing 411 victims, they either were never returned, so we never found them, or they were returned deceased. And so we don't have, firsthand testimony from the Missing 411 victims. And what's interesting when you compare the two is the Time Storm cases are almost living accounts of what could possibly be happening within the Missing 411 phenomenon.
That's actually really interesting, just because I've got a friend, Anthony Beckett, who's part of Exopolitics Great Britain. And he actually directed me both to the Missing 411 and also the Time Storms. And he was looking at those two particular books in conjunction. So it's very interesting in terms of just synchronicity that you're looking at the two books. And he, again, thinks that this is electromagnetic and that there is definitely a strong correlation between the two. And it's really interesting because my birthday was very recently. It was on the 24th of June, and I got the book Time Storm. So that's so I got that a few days ago. So it's definitely on my reading list.
Yeah, I'm glad you got a copy of it, because I've had a lot of people, not a lot, but a few people reach out to me they can't get a hold of. They're asking me, where can we get this book, because it's out of circulation. And when they do find it, it's very expensive. So that's really a bummer, but I'm glad that you were able to get a copy of it. And
yeah, the UK. So I would check on Amazon UK possibly if you're.
Oh, okay.
Because she's an English author. So
yes, exactly. And I encourage everybody to read the Missing 411 book series in conjunction with Time Storms if you can get a copy of it, because you'll understand, or just read my paper, because I have a lot of examples in there as well, where I compare what David, one of David's profile points, and then I just layer in a Time Storm, case study, and I show what could possibly be happening. And okay, so part two, so that's part one. Part two is where I get into the micro and how it drills down into the individual. And that's where Pierre Sabak, that's where your research is. And it's between pages 49 through 53. And that section is one of my favorite sections, because I compare your research with the books, Carlos Castaneta's research. And I love looking at both of you. I can read a section of it if you want, but you're more of the academic way of talking about it. And then Carlos Castaneda just comes right in for the jugular and it's just very upfront and bold and blunt about it. And it's really nice to compare the two. You guys are looking at more of the macro view of it, but you're showing how it affects us down to the individual.
I'm really flattered by the comparison. Yeah, he's an exceptional author. I did read a lot of his books probably in my mid-20s, 20, 25 years ago. So I'm familiar with his literature.
Yeah, when I was reading his book, and okay, this happens to me all the time. I will buy a bunch of books and I'll end up reading multiple books at the same time. And I always end up reading two books that I know have a thread of something in common. And that happened with your research and Carlos's research. So that's why I did that. I just went back and forth between the two of you as I was writing that section. And it was so much fun to do that. And then in the discussion, that's where I talk about some of the like what happens when you go through an initiation with this predatory archetype. I talk about the gifts and talents that get brought up to the surface. I look at them as mystery school type of teachings that are hidden within our blood and bones. And that's kind of almost where I get into the self-defense perspective of it. And I talk about this is where you can identify this predator, both physically and the symptoms that you'll feel. And then I talk about different techniques that you can develop once you go through an initiation with the predator, and how you come out as almost like a 2.0 version of yourself. And then the conclusion, obviously, that's self-explanatory. But that's the chapters. And like I said, the main part of the paper is guided by the profile points that David Paulides curated within his Missing 411 book series. This is David Paulides, and these are only a few of his books. He has 10 books, and he is a retired private investigator. And he stumbled upon the missing persons cases within national parks while he was investigating something else. So this wasn't even on his radar. It was brought to his attention by national park rangers. They heard of him. They heard of the other investigating that he was working on. He was actually hired by Silicon Valley CEOs to do research. And I won't get into that. That could be a whole nother show in itself. But while he was doing this investigation for these CEOs, the national park rangers came up to him and said, hey, we heard about what you're doing. You need to look into these missing persons cases because they're very unusual. And they described to him that somebody will go missing. There'll be this big effort to try and find this person. If they don't find them after whatever, maybe 3 weeks go by, it just disappears. And it's happened enough that the Rangers were thinking something's going on. And so they asked him to look into it. He made a phone call to a friend because he was retired at the time. He called somebody that was actively working on the police force and said, hey, is there anything to this? Can you look into this? And his friend called back and said, yeah, you need to pull on this thread. And that's just a really top level explanation, because David has plenty of interviews on YouTube and he goes into detail about exactly what happened. And he does it way better than I could ever do it. But that's just a brief description of how he got to doing this type of investigation and how the 10 books came about. So here we are 10 books later, 2 documentaries later, and he still doesn't have answers, which shows you how complex this is to have a seasoned, retired detective turned private investigator that hasn't gotten to the bottom of it. And that's all he's been doing, is researching this stuff, talking with people, talking with victims, talking with coroners, talking with national parks people if he can. And this isn't just present within national parks or forests. He has a book called Sobering Coincidence that goes into college campuses and then outside of college campuses, the city centers, the bars, and shows how their victims are even taken within very crowded locations. And these are the profile points directly pulled from the books. And I give examples of time storm examples for every single one of these. And I don't really need to read through these, right? Did you want to add anything on any of these before I go to the next one?
Missing clothes or shoes. I think in folklore and fairy encounters, there is a tradition, isn't there, where in order to protect yourself against a fairy, you should take off your clothing or turn it inside out, or again,
I heard that before.
Throw dirt at the fairies. So I'm kind of wondering if that somehow interrupts the electromagnetic field in some way, just in terms of the positive and negative charges. But that's just purely speculative. But no, otherwise, I think we can move on. But they are interesting, like, for example, water and granite. And I'd never heard of the connection before, that people had gone missing in very crowded places. So again, that's something which was new, but doesn't actually surprise me, because if we are dealing with a holographic culture and they have deconstructed the mechanics of reality, then you would actually think that they would be able to move in between time so that we wouldn't necessarily notice them. It would almost be like that they could come in at a different time frame and just take somebody.
Yeah, there's one of the most fascinating cases that David does an excellent job talking about. I've heard him talk about it several times on several interviews. It is in the book, Sobering Coincidence. There was a man that went missing in a very crowded bar. There was only one way in and one way out. There were cameras, the CCTV cameras, and a police detective went through those videos. I mean, he went through them so thoroughly. He watched the man go in and no one ever watched him leave. And still to this day, they have no idea what happened to this guy. And David says that the investigator that was assigned to the case was so adamant on finding this guy. This is incredible. He was, that guy's face was so burned into his memory. The police officer was at a football stadium, and across the stadium, he saw what he thought was the man. And he leaves his chair, his seat, goes running towards where he thinks that man is. It ends up being the guy's brother. And it's like, I get the goosebumps when I think about that. So I'm not like, David tells it way better than I do. Everyone's got to listen to that. It's definitely in one of his interviews. But to have that man, he's so dead set on finding this guy that he finds his brother in, you know, a stadium's like 70,000 or whatever, 7,000 people can fit into a stadium, or 10,000, whatever. And he can pick that person out. So that's how complex and mysterious these cases are, that it completely baffles detectives. And it gets them to the point where you know, they turn into these canines that search for these people. Once they get on the scent, they can't get off of it. And it's so unimaginable that you can't find somebody and you can't find a body. You can't get to the bottom of it. Very addicting.
I mean, I came across a couple of cases. I came across a case where there was a jogger which was running with a friend, and he kind of fell over and disappeared. And again, I think the police for a time suspected the other person, but it was shown that, and they just disappeared by all accounts. There was a second account of husband and wife, and the husband went missing and then he returned, but he went missing for a few months. And the police initially suspected that the wife might have been involved in murder or something of that nature. But then he came back and he had no recollection of where he'd been. And he stayed for a while and then just disappeared again. And he's never been found since. I think so. He disappeared for like 20 years and has not come back. So that's kind of interesting. Is like, do people have a predisposition to be taken? Is it something to do with their electrical field? Are they chosen? And if they are chosen and they're put back, you know, can they be taken again? And does it predispose them to being taken again? So I think these are all very interesting questions.
Yes, definitely. Okay, I'm gonna go off of this. So the next author is Jenny Randles, of course, and this is a picture of Jenny. She has 50 books now. I mean, she's a prolific author. This is a picture of a promo shoot that she did with one of the other authors, Peter Ho, I think, from 1996. And this book, this image is taken from After Death and the World Beyond. So that's another book that she's written besides Time Storms. But I just put, this is her bio. Look at this thing. I mean, I got this from Wikipedia. So it's so dense that I just went through and highlighted and bolded some of the sections that were relevant for our talk. You know, she's a UFO and a paranormal researcher. She's had 50 books. She's co-authored books. She's been published in publications like New Scientist. You know, she's done documentaries. She's, you know, consulted on TV series. She was a columnist for 40 and Times, and she coined the term Oz factor, which we'll get into that. That's a side effect. That's a physical side effect that she talks about, where you have this almost like time stops is how I would describe it. But she is currently the editor of Northern UFO News, which apparently she's still doing today. So she's really qualified to distinguish between something that would be UFO related and something that is Earth-based. And this is why I love her work so much, because these are the quotes I pulled directly from her book and I put in the paper. She is like me and thinks that this is a natural Earth phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of this Earth, she says, and will in time have a scientific resolution. And, you know, she's talking about the cases. What follows are best considered to be encounters with a novel but down to earth phenomenon, which can be understood in terms of real physics and as a consequence and for the presence of actual energy fields. And once I read the book and thought about it in comparison to the missing 411 cases, it reminds me, the way I wrap my head around it is it reminds me of atmospheric quicksand. And so, you know, back in the day when we didn't understand what quicksand was and two people are walking through the forest, somebody turns, they turn back and the person's gone. And they're like, the devil took him or the devil took her. Well, the devil didn't take them, the ground took them. Now we understand what quicksand is. You know, if you want to say the elemental forces took them, that would be more accurate, because what quicksand is water and dirt, which are elemental forces. So it would be more accurate to say the elementals took them. But I take that, you know, that analogy or metaphor, or whatever, an example, and I I basically say it reminds me of atmospheric quicksand, where, like you had said in your example, they're running, 1 minute they're here, the next minute they're gone. There was no quicksand. Where did they go? Oh, that's the way I have to wrap my hand around it.
I think it's a really good term, atmospheric quicksand. It's really, really good. I think it describes the phenomenon very aptly in terms of what's occurring. In terms of Invisible Kingdom, I've been looking into research into portals, and the description is very apt.
Yeah, and I'm kind of bummed that I didn't put it in the paper. If this ever becomes a book, it'll probably be a chapter in one of the books. But
Absolutely.
I just added it here. I wish I would have put it in there. But a very perfect example or case study from time storms that almost encapsulates all of the missing 411 profile points is on page 26 through 29 and in time storms, and it deals with Corporal Armando Valdez, and it includes missing clothes. Well, it provides an explanation for where these missing clothes are going. It is a perfect example of lack of memory and a point of separation, which isolation is a big key from any predator standpoint. Even a human predator tries to isolate their prey. And, in the animal kingdom, when, a lion or a jaguar or something is hunting a herd of animals, they like to isolate the weak or the old. And so our predator is following along those same rules of engagement that we see within not only the human kingdom, but the animal kingdom. Do you want me to read the section on Corporal Valdez or Valdez? Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think it helps and it's relevant,
okay.
Yeah, I'm quite happy for you to do that.
Yeah, because the reason why I like this example is because it was very well documented. It was a high up military man, and he was teaching survival skills to a group of recruits. So this is the man that is supposed to be able to survive a situation like this. And he is so good at his job that they trust him, the chain of command, trust him to teach new recruits this information. And so Colonel Valdez this happened in 1977. It is in inhospitable terrain in Chile. And he has a group of recruits that he has taken up this mountain to do this training. And let's see. So I'm just going to read from here because it's a lot shorter than reading the book. So like I said, it happened in Chile. It's 1977. A small unit of Army recruits was sent on a 2-day exercise into the inhospitable terrain above the small town of, Puder in Chile. They were led by Corporal Armando Valdez. The group was camped at an altitude of 12,000 feet when the incident occurred at 3:50 a.m. One of the recruits noticed 2 fuzzy violet lights were descending from the mountains and heading their way. The ground below was filled with an eerie glow, which is something that we see in time storms. Thinking this could be a drill and assuming the lights were flares, Valdez went to investigate at 4:15 a.m. This is the official point of separation, as his armed recruits stayed behind and provided cover. Shortly after Valdez disappeared into the darkness, the violet light disappeared. Valdez returned at 4:30 a.m., so 15 minutes later, but he approached them from behind, not from the direction in which he had just walked. Moreover, he was clearly less than well. He was wondering and talking in a trance-like state, almost as if he was sleepwalking. "You do not know who we are or where we come from," he said in a monotone. Could this have been a message from his captor? He could barely stand and collapsed onto the ground, apparently unconscious. Although they had seen him shave only hours earlier, he was now sporting several days' growth of beard. His watch had stopped at about 4:30 a.m., the approximate time of his return to the camp, but the date display, which had to be wound on manually through 24 hours at time to alter it, read April 30th. It was as if Valdez had lived through 5 days in under 15 minutes. I mean, how does that happen? So when he finally awoke at 7 a.m., he was in a state of shock with massive memory loss and no proper body coordination. Even after a difficult 2-hour trek to the close town nearby, Valdez was reported as still only semi-coherent, while a local school teacher taped an interview with him and some of the troops. Imagine being in that condition and lost in a national forest or park, with no one to help you. It took a trained military man over 5 hours to become only semi-coherent, and he still had no control over his body. So upon his return to our reality, I surmise that he was probably guided back to his recruits. And if he hadn't been guided back, he probably would have been, he could have been a victim within the Missing 411 books. He could have wandered right off a cliff and fell and died. And like I talk about how in the Missing 411 series, there's reports of avid seasoned trekkers found dead at the base of cliffs. These people who knew the landscape intimately, just like this corporal, they find themselves walking off of a ledge. And in addition, if Valdez had removed any article of clothing or his boots during this 15 minutes or 5 days spent in this other realm, those items could be there today and the search and rescue teams would never find them. This may help explain why some of the Missing 411 victims' personal possessions like shoes, boots, and heavy equipment, which are all difficult to break down in nature, are never recovered. In 1983, when the military finally gave a journalist permission to interview the corporal, he still had no memory from the time after he walked toward the violet lights until he regained consciousness near the campfire. He states, the missing 15 minutes, they are a void in my mind. Now, Valdez, he had been forced to undergo psychiatric treatment in a hospital because it left him debilitated and traumatized, which is what we see as well. He displayed no evidence of prior mental abnormality. Sorry, that was a hard word for me to say. And so this is a perfect example of if clothes went missing, a point of separation, and loss of memory. Let me go back. And what I love about that encounter is the fact that it was a military man that experienced it. And because he was in charge of other military personnel, the debriefing from him was intense, because this is where I put on my corporate hat. And I say, if this happened to me and I was in charge of this man and all of those recruits, I would be looking at it, from a military perspective, as these are assets. I just lost a very valuable asset, and I lost an asset that I used to train other assets. So this guy never recovered. He never recovered, and he was never put in that position again, then to be this leader and this trainer. A man that should have survived the situation was taken out by something they don't even know what it is. So there's, almost a national security threat at this point, and he doesn't remember. I'm sure that they put him through hypnotherapy, because I would, if he was reporting into me, I would know everything about what happened to him. And the fact that now they have to find somebody who is able to survive this inhospitable terrain, essentially, so that, because these recruits, they never got trained that day. They still have to take people up there and train them in this type of fighting. And so they're down a man, they're compromised, because now they have an enemy or a threat that they can't understand. So that's the reason why this is actually my favorite time storm example, because of all the factors that get layered in after the fact. If you look at it from not only the chain of command militarily, but me looking at it from a corporate perspective, a hierarchy of someone's going to have to answer for this to somebody up above, and someone's going to have an explanation, and there's going to have to be protocol put into place so that this does not happen again. that's how it works in the real world versus when you're just looking at a case study. So this was probably very, very scrutinized by all, everyone within that chain of command. And it's the perfect example for both missing 411 and time storms.
It is kind of interesting because I do think to myself, well, do certain people sort of, is something attracted to certain individuals, and does that occur at a particular time?
Well, it's funny that you said you were almost describing somebody that's predisposed to this stuff. And I interviewed Paul Eno the other day because he's also in the paper, and I described that to him. I said that he was like that, as he was talking about, we went through a lot of his experiences that he had. And I said, you know what? You just sound like you're somebody that switches things on and off when they go. Because he was giving me an example of being in a hotel, a haunted hotel, and he was in the haunted, like the room that was supposedly haunted. And I said, you know what, Paul, I wonder how many people stay in that room and nothing ever happens. And then somebody like you or your son, his son is Ben, comes into that room and stuff just starts going off. And it's almost as if people can be portals in a sense. They're the ones that can connect. It's almost like the transmission that's coming off of them is what picks up in the surroundings and plugs into the surroundings, and then it switches everything on. And that's why I like to look at us as a technology, because it's as if it's that person that can flip a switch in reality and make it occur. And that's why I associate it with the blood and bones, and how the blood and bones are a technology. And I always, when I work with people, sometimes I almost counsel people in a way, but when I work with them, I try and develop the mystery school teachings that their ancestors left and hid within their blood and bones. Because these mystery school teachings, in my opinion, remind me of technology that teaches us about the technology of this reality. And it's something that's extremely suppressed for the general population. And it, like I said, it's hidden within our blood and bones. Just because you have access to maybe something that would be considered, what a friend of mine is doing research on, witch blood. It can be called witch blood. You might have access in your family line to witch blood, but unless you're somebody like Paul, who has the authority and can responsibly use these mystery school teachings, it won't get switched on for you. And so I think even within the technology itself, within these mystery school teachings, there's an intelligence that understands the type of soul or spirit that is plugged into the human vessel. And then once it detects, ooh, we've got a live one here, it starts activating all these different things, like it did with me when I was in the corporate environment. It was just boom, it activated in me. A timer went off. That's exactly how I describe what happened to me. Is I was activated, a timer went off, and then all of this stuff started bubbling up from my blood and bones, from my blood and bone technology, all of this information. And it came across as very much like mystery school teachings, and ancestors stepped forward. Ancestors step forward. I am, like one ancestor would step forward that specializes in this lesson and that teaching. And it was just 10 years was like that. And I think that's just my interpretation of how this stuff works. And it manifests through the human vessel, depending on the type of spirit that's plugged into it. And so I'm interested to know if you have had any experiences like that.
Yeah, I've had absolutely loads of different types of experiences. I do find that they tend to group together and then they'll go dormant. And then so they occur and then they'll go dormant for a while or for a few years even, and then come back. So yeah, I've had precognition. I've seen shining beings. I've seen shadow beings. Again, poltergeist. So like people walking around my bed.
Okay.
appearances of people who may not have been the people that I was thinking that they were. So, for example, I started a Tai Chi class and my Tai Chi teacher appeared to me, but it was unusual because she was simultaneously there but not there. And I obviously just presumed it was my Tai Chi teacher, but I don't know. Maybe was that just some kind of projection? Because it's very difficult to know, because this predator can read your mind. I had a out-of-body experience, but it may have been, well, I may have been levitating. It's very difficult to know because I was floating and I was able to control it. And I went up to the ceiling and I touched the ceiling, could feel the artex, and I was really close up. Like, I've never been that close to the ceiling before. And I was watching the television and I was, and that was an amazing experience. So yeah, I've kind of, it's kind of interesting what the shadow beings told me, because when I spoke to the shadow beings, I was in a trance, but I was writing stuff down at the time. And what was interesting was that they spoke in poetry. So they all rhymed. And that kind of got me thinking about, well, Muhammad, he is verses of the Quran. So I found that interesting. They also told me, I asked them where they came from, and they said that they came from the earth, which then kind of made me think of, well, folklore and the small people and the fairy folk. I do think that the shadow beings are actually using a displacement field so that you cannot see them. That's my opinion. When I was in a trance and I was in my bed, sat upright writing, but I did see them during the day as well. And they did look three-dimensional, these shadow beings. So I would see them in the house at that time as well. So, and so, yeah, lots of stuff over the years. I can tell you some stuff offline as well.
Yeah, we'll have to do just a talk where it's just the two of us. But I have a theory on the reason why it comes in stages or phases. So I was taught by my ancestors that with mystery, specifically with mystery school teachings, they do that so that your human vessel can catch up. So, when you work with this other aspect of what you were just talking about, it's very, very fast. And my ancestors will communicate with me through images and through movies. And the reason why they do that, and sometimes with a word, I'll see a word. And the reason why they do that is because from the time flows differently from where they're at versus where we're at. And they'll send me a picture, and within that picture, it just all unfolds. It unfolds. And they don't have to have a conversation like we're doing. It might take 2 hours for them to explain in our timeline what they're trying to tell me, but in that picture, I get it instantly. And it might take a couple seconds to come out and filter and go in, and it may take me a month to process the lesson, but the transmission of it is instant in the image. And so that's how it's worked with me as well, where they'll give me a condensed, almost curriculum of lessons. And then I have to sometimes I'll go 6 months to a year, and I'll process it. I will, in that time frame, I'll come across somebody like you who says something about the shadow being spoken poetry. I completely understand what you're talking about, and I have that experience as well. But from a completely different angle and perspective, which is why I said I didn't want to get into it now, because it would be a whole nother show all into itself. But you find yourself coming across people that will confirm these teachings, especially if they're mystery school teachings. You will find somebody who has a similar teaching within their blood and bones that they have activated. And when you communicate with these people, you'll learn the different ways in which the teachings manifest through the vessels, because we are a technology, in my opinion, and because our soul patterning or our individual essence profile, that's what I use in my novel series, my sci-fi novel series. I call it individual essence profile, that is your soul or your spirit, when it plugs into your human vessel, it determines how all of this information is then manifested through your body, just like your eye color, you know, is determined, just like your hair color. You know, I have naturally curly hair versus straight hair. It's going to manifest through us in our individual way, just like our fingerprints. So you have the experience with the shadow being speaking in poetry. I have the experience as well, but in a completely different way. And that's why it's very important. When I always teach people, it's very important when you feel compelled to talk to somebody or read a book or listen to something, you need to do it 100%, because that is the aspect of you that's sending you a cue. Because you have to participate and you have to actually act something out in order to sometimes release this information that comes to you. So it's the reason why I started jujitsu lessons. I was told it's time, and I wanted to do this years ago, and I kept getting blocked in doing it. And I finally just within the past year, I found the perfect school. I found the perfect instructor, and everything fell into place. And ever since I've been doing that, it is the participation of acting the activity out that releases this information, that releases the mystery school teachings. And not everybody has to physically choke somebody out like I do in jujitsu. Some people paint. Some people like you have to write. Some people have to read. Whatever, you have to garden. But in my opinion, that's your ancestors telling you, if you do this act, it is almost the key that unlocks the information that's within your blood and bones. But the rub is you have to participate, like you said earlier, because we are here, we are physical beings, we are grounded on this planet, we are participating within the planet. You have to discover what that act is that is within, you know, associated with those mystery school teachings, that's assigned to your blood and bones. And I feel like I totally went off on a tangent, but it had something
that
to
was
do with
really,
what you were
really
talking
interesting.
about.
It kind of explained a lot of things. But I do think also, and we're dealing here with consciousness as well. So
Yes.
when you start looking at it, it then starts looking back. And so there is this definite interaction, because I certainly know that certainly when I started to write The Murder of Reality, that all hell broke loose. I mean, I had a couple of what I would describe as supernatural experiences when I was a child. I saw a flying saucer. It wasn't a flying saucer. It was a missile in the field, and that took off on a right angle, and that was really peculiar. And then and that got me into flying saucers and UFOs, and I've always been interested in that ever since. Again, I did see a missile flying by the school window, and I saw my teacher as well. The day he died, he walked past me on the steps, and I was so convinced that he was, because they announced it in the assembly the next day, but I was so convinced that he was alive. I said to my friend, I've got to go to the headmaster and tell him, because he's got it all completely wrong. And my friend said, look, the headmaster's going to think you're crazy.
Yes.
Because he said it was only a few weeks back that you said that you saw a missile flying by the window of the school. But I thought what was very interesting about this ghost that I saw, if it was a ghost, was that it appeared physical. It made a noise. It was solid. It certainly wasn't transparent. And I'm sure that I could have physically touched whatever I was seeing, and it would have registered as a physical being or an entity. Yep. So that was interesting. But then nothing really much happened until I started to write The Murder of Reality, and then
and then it just started going off.
Yeah, just a lot of things happened. Just so, for example, I would wear a silver chain with a pendant, and the pendant would always come off, but the chain would be on. And this happened a number of times, and it also happened to my wife as well. And it kind of freaked me out. So I gave my brother the necklace, because I thought, well, is it something to do with it? I wasn't freaked out by it. I was kind of, I was curious, but I thought, well, why is this happening? So I got another necklace, and I thought, okay, I had a metal chain, and it had a pendant, and I thought, well, it's got a clasp. It somehow it could kind of, I could roll on it, the clasp could open, it could, the pendant could fall off, and then it could seal itself. It couldn't, because it was one of those really awkward clasps which you've got to.
Yes.
But anyway, so I got,
Is it
yeah,
like
one
one
of
of the ones
those,
with the hook?
yeah.
I
And so
gotcha.
I said, okay, I'm going to get myself another piece of jade, and I'm going to this time get a leather thong. And so I kind of tied it up and put on loads and loads of knots. And then a little while later, it came separated, but it was still tied around my neck with this big knot.
And what was
And
it? What was on this pendant?
I had to physically cut off the leather, because I couldn't undo the knot, because it was.
You couldn't even undo the knot. No,
Because I couldn't
what
even
was
do
this
the knot.
pendant? What was the pendant made of? I'm curious now.
It was jade.
It was jade. Okay.
Yeah, I've still got it upstairs. Yeah, it's
Wow.
basically a kidney shape, from a yin and yang shape.
Okay.
So again, that's kind of
Fascinating.
That's kind of dematerialization, but only but only at a small level. But I've seen other things as well. But I think also the difficulty is that trying to separate what is supernatural and what could just be an hallucination, or what could be a dream. And I think that that's very difficult. And I think one of the difficulties why this is the case is that these experiences can imprint upon the subconscious mind. And so you can have a dream and you can think, oh, well, that's real. And you could be re-remembering something else which is supernatural, but you're not necessarily participating in anything which is supernatural. And so I think that this is kind of really fascinating in terms of, I think a lot of these experiences are very similar to dream morphology. It's something that I'm going to be speaking about in my book, in Invisible Kingdom. But yeah, that juxtaposition between reality and between the construct of reality and the information field, and how we can gather information from that field, which is shared, it's a shared space.
Yep, exactly. I'm going to touch upon the two things here. The discernment, you're basically talking about discernment. And that's why I think it took me about 10 years to get to the point where I understood I'm working with ancestors. I understood the different types of ancestors I was working with and the spaces in which I was working with them in. And that in itself was a mystery school teaching, altogether. And so it does, I agree, it takes a long time. And if you come at it, I used to always think that me not having a background in any of this was a weakness. No, I've come to the term just recently that it was actually one of my strengths, because I was so skeptical through all of this. I didn't fall prey to, if I heard a voice or if something came into my space that was quote unquote giving me information, I was like, get the heck out of here. I don't have time for you. And so if I picked up on anything, it was immediately dismissed by me, because of just of having the type of background that I have, and being skeptical and understanding that you can be tricked and fooled. And I was not going to allow that to happen to me as best that I could. And I think that's why it took me 10 years to really, really trust these ancestors that I work with. I put them through so many tests over those 10 years that it compiled up, where it wasn't a coincidence anymore. What I was experiencing, what they were teaching me, what I was doing, the path that I was going on, it came to a point where it was like, okay, this is really happening, and this is how it's happening. And so I started embracing it. And I think that's a really healthy way of doing it, is making them prove to you what they're saying before you even sign off on it. I think for me, that is my advice, because that's what worked with me. And it gets rid of all the BS. You know, I had a BS meter, and I still do. I had it strong for years, and I would not put up with anything that would came into my environment because I just needed to learn this. I didn't know anything. I was starting from ground zero, and I'll be damned if something's going to come in here that I don't know you. I don't know you from Adam. And I try and think of it is if a human being came to me at my desk while I was at work, it walked into my office and started telling me about marketing and sales, I would be like, get the hell out of here because I don't need you. I already got the job. I'm doing the job. I don't need you. And I didn't, you know, and I was able to choose the people back then. You know, when I was going through my my marketing degree, I could choose the teachers. I could see them. I could understand, are they good teachers? You know, when you're in college, you can choose stuff like that. But when you're dealing with these metaphysical surroundings, you can't see them. You don't know what the hell they are. And especially if you don't have a background, you really can be prey very easily. And, you know, I think that that was a strength for me, that I was very skeptical. I had a healthy dose of skepticism because I was still open to experiencing it. But if I experienced something negative, it was like, okay, I understood what I'm going to try and figure out what that is, understand it as best as I can, but it's got to keep its distance because, you know, I was raised with self-defense and with martial arts, and I was raised to protect your surroundings at all times. And that's not to be, you know, I wasn't raised to be paranoid. I was raised to be cautious. And that's how I approached all of this. So the discernment is definitely key to working within these realities. And if you almost prove yourself, certain ancestors that are very mature and very advanced in their, I guess, existence, they will step forward. And I'm glad you brought that up because this will tie right back and we can get back into the paper. I felt as if this predator that I was writing about from an archetypal perspective was literally sitting next to me while I was writing this paper, while I was researching it. And my ancestors taught me that I had a seat at the adults table when it came to the topic of the predatory archetype. And, you know, they showed me an image of sitting at a table next to this predator. And not only was I seated next to him and I was looked at as a colleague, an equal, I was not only seated at the table, I was running the presentation and I was the table itself. So we were analyzing, the two of us, this predatory archetype, were analyzing me, and then I was analyzing me, analyzing me. It was crazy. So I totally understand what you're talking about, where it looks at you as you're looking at it, because that happened to me. And after I had had that vision and that lesson that they walked me through, I was working with a woman, her name is Elise Orsaw, and I'm using her as one of my case studies for my PhD. She created a tarot deck. So we're working with this tarot deck, we're doing guided visions, and every once in a while before a guided vision, she'll do a reading for me. And I was asking her about the paper because I thought to myself, I had an interview with somebody else that I had consulted with for the paper. And this was somebody that has a background in this type of stuff. And he was taken aback at some of the information that he was helping me with in the paper. And I thought to myself, did I become too numb to this topic? And am I going, you know, do I have to worry about that when I'm writing? Should I maybe rewrite some of the sections so they're not as heavy and they're not as dark? And so I'm asking this, this Elise, she was doing a tarot card reading for me. I said, did they pull me out too far? Did they pull me out too far when I sat at this table and I'm sitting next to this predator as an equal? And as she's, dealing the cards, she looks up at me and says, Michelle, I just heard you can't work with the predator while you're still prey. And when she said that, it was like this washed over me as, oh my God, it was such a succinct way of describing exactly what happened to me over the past year. And I thought, yeah, I am not afraid of this aspect of reality because I'm no longer prey. I've gotten to the point where it trusts me in being responsible and mature in delivering the information. So I felt very, it's almost as if I got confirmation from the predator itself and from that aspect of reality and my ancestors, just within that one statement of, yes, we did pull you out, but we had to pull you out because you cannot write about what you wrote about if you're still prey. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
and it tied into everything that you were saying.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting because I had an experience in which I kind of became the prey. I was doing a film course with this film director who's relatively well known in the alternative media. And I was staying over at his place, and this dark cloud, I was sleeping, this dark cloud just jumped on my shoulder, and it tried to suffocate me. It tried to kill me. And I flung it off and swore at it, and it went to the corner of the room, and I could instantly sense that this black cloud was scared of me. It was almost like that it had tried to do something. It had bitten off more than what it could handle, and it was in the, and so I sensed it was scared. And so I turned on the light, and I was looking at this black cloud in the corner of the room, and I'm thinking, well, what do I do now? So I thought, okay, I'll go to the toilet and maybe it will have gone. So I came back, still there in the corner of the room. And I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do? And so I was debating this in my mind. Do I physically grab, get a chair and try and grab the thing and throw it out? Or do I just leave it? And so I decided, I thought, well, it's scared of me, so I don't think it's going to attack me again. So I just went back to sleep, after watching it for a while, and after the novelty of that wore off, then I decided to go back to sleep. And it's kind of interesting because the filmmaker told me, well, he collected magical objects, but he also told me that he'd had a similar experience. But this entity had appeared. I think it was dressed in sort of Middle Eastern costume, and he thought it might have been a djinn, and it tried to physically throw him off the balcony. They were physically fighting, but I didn't have that type of experience. I just saw this black cloud. But so again, I think it's interesting. And after that, I did have health issues afterwards, and I did think, I wonder whether it had imprinted on my energetic field at some level. That just crossed my mind. So
yeah, it almost like tagged you. It tagged you of, that is such an incredible story. I wrote another note because that's something I have to tell you a story offline about something that happened to me, but actually a couple things, but yeah, that is incredible. So you probably freaked it out. It was probably like, whoa, he can actually see me, and he can manipulate me.
Well, I literally threw it off me, but it was trying to suffocate me.
Yeah.
So it was, if you imagine that, it was like trying to push my head into the cushion and suffocate me to kill me.
Yeah. Yes. That is fast. Okay. So I'm writing all these notes down as we're talking. Okay, I've got to have you on my show, and we can go over all. We'll just do stories. We'll do story time on Metaphysical Mining, my show. All right, let me go back to, is it okay if I share the screen and go back to
yeah, of course, again? Please do.
Okay, excellent. Let's see where we left off. So we're comfortable with missing 411. We're comfortable with time storms, right? All right, so, oh, and this is perfect to kind of tie into what you were talking about. I just did a real quick, I grabbed some of the paragraphs from the paper to let everybody see what are the environmental effects of a time storm and what are the physical symptoms. And you've described some of them through your experiences. You were just talking about a mass or a cloud or a fog. And they can come in all different colors and shapes and sizes. The first, I think it's in the foreword to the book, or in the intro of Time Storms, there's a woman that experiences a fog that's the size of a house. So they can be quite large. or they can be small, as like what you said, where you flung it and you could see it in the corner of your room. And time storms have temperature changes from hot or cold. There's electrical odors, electrical buzzing, humming, rushing sounds, electrical popping. There's vibrations, and there's, okay, we were onto the physical symptoms. And I was talking about how a doctor had confirmed what one of the victims from a time storm, he was experiencing this discoordination, his inability to drive after, you know, he had experienced a time storm. So that's one of the symptoms. But feeling medicated, which is something I call darting, which could be similar to what we do with animals. When we dart an animal and we tag them, you know, to monitor their population, or just to monitor for whatever reason. It reminds me of when we dart animals. It's almost as if this predatory aspect darts us, and in order to isolate us and separate us. And so some of the other symptoms are dizzy, dazed, feeling detached, isolated again, disoriented, getting goosebumps, and you know, a tingling sensation on your skin as you would get with electricity, weightlessness, timelessness. Some people report radiation type burns, really, really bad. Like the one man was on a motorcycle and he had a leather outfit on, and he was driving in the rain. And when he went into the time storm, he heated up so much that, you know how leather, when you heat it up, it gets shiny? Well, that happened to his suit. And his skin was burned. The skin that was exposed, you know, like maybe around his neck, or, you know, where maybe it came through the visor of his helmet, he had burns from that. And his mother, when he got home, his mother was able to, you know, to verify and witness the effects of it. And his suit was steaming whenever he came out, and he was dry when he came out of the time storm. So you can get nauseous, you can faint, you can have hallucinations, auditory and visual. And visual hallucinations could be the reason why some of the missing 411 individuals will walk off a cliff, because maybe they're not seeing a cliff. Maybe they're seeing what looks to be a field, and that could be just, you know, they're being lured to walk in that direction to then fall off the cliff.
This reminds me of being pixie-led as well, in terms of where
Yes.
people become disorientated. And I'm kind of looking at the same things in Invisible Kingdom, this idea of hallucinations and dream morphology in relation to supernatural events. So yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, one of the best missing 411 examples of a time storm effect is in the second documentary. David Paulides has two. The second one is called The Hunted, Missing 411, The Hunted. It's the very last case that they cover in that documentary. And the man is wandering around the Crazies. They're called the Crazies, this mountain range. And he is very familiar with the terrain. He hunts there all the time. And thank God he had his cell phone, because David is able to go through. David sits with one of the police officers that investigated the case in the officer's office, and they have a map. And he shows you in the documentary where this guy went, because they were pinging, you know, they were able to ping his cell phone. So they can watch him as he's going. At one point in time, he made a phone call, so they know exactly where he was at some point. And then they just followed the pings, and then it led to where they found his remains. But in that example, how I interpret that is because this man was so familiar with the terrain, he hunts there all the time. There was a ranch, a family owned a ranch and land, not but just down the hill from where his remains were found. Because he didn't go for help, and because he was acting so almost disoriented, I believe, in my opinion, that he was not within the same timeline. He was either fast forwarded or rewound back in time to a point where he wasn't seeing the same trees. You know, like if you would turn left at this tree versus that tree may not have been even planted yet or had grown. So I think that's why he was so disoriented, because when at one point he took a left when he should have taken a right. There's no reason why he should have taken a left. And that's what set him off down this path. And then the reason why he didn't just walk down the hill to the people who, you know, they were interviewed as well. The couple that owned this ranch, they were sitting on their porch and they're like, his remains were found right there. You can see from our porch. So he should have been able to just walk down and they would have helped him. They're like, he could have yelled for us. We would have heard him, but he didn't. So maybe the ranch wasn't there. Maybe the family hadn't settled there yet. There was nothing there. So that could have disoriented him as well, as in, where the hell am I? Because I know he probably knew those people, and, you know, he knew to look for certain markers, but it appeared as if his behavior was not, you know, reacting to his circumstances that he was used to. And so that, you know, if anyone gets a chance to watch the second documentary, The Missing 411, it is the best one by far. It's the one I prefer over, you know, the first one's good, but the second one, if you're still on the fence after watching that, I've got nothing else for you. I don't know, like you're never going to be off the fence at that point. It's really that compelling.
I mean, I've also considered the fact that people in their everyday lives, that they could be running at different time frames, almost like different tracks. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously, I mean, sometimes a real big event occurs, but it need not be. I think that slips in times can be very subtle, and that we can go into a different time zone, a slightly different time zone, and then come out of that time zone. And that can occur in a person's life, and that can occur often.
Yes, I totally agree. And the thing about the location that he was at, they tell about there's you know, I guess lore that goes, you know, there's a tale that goes with that mountain. The reason why it was called the Crazies, something to do with the Native American tribes that were around the mountain. Maybe they were warring. I think that's what it was. And the one tribe put a curse on the mountain to stop the other tribe from coming in and invading. So it could have to do with whatever this magical ritual type of hex that was put on the mountain at the time. That's what they start off with, and they in the documentary, and they explain why this mountain was called the Crazies, because apparently, you know, the case that they show is more extreme, but apparently other people have interesting encounters whenever they're at this location. All right, so we did touch upon at the beginning archetypes, and this is where I'm going to start folding everything into your research, Pierre. And I touched upon a lot about technology and how I like to look at this stuff from the aspect of technology. And because I have a corporate background, I understand when you provide a product or a service, how you have to have control measures whenever you have a production line, or, you know, if you're offering a service. And that can also kind of carry over into the technology aspect of when you're working in a laboratory. And so that's how I look at archetypes as advanced behavioral science and technology that this predatory archetype is using to control us in our reality. And your books go into that in depth. And so when you're talking about a science and a technology, you have to look at how it's structured, and how it carries out this control. What are the patterns of behavior specific to the reality and the current inhabitants? And the archetype is not only a control mechanism for us, but it's also a control mechanism for any of the avatars. So the species of beings that then tunnel into our reality using this archetype technology, they have to follow a certain set of rules of engagement, you know, protocol rules of engagement, so that they don't mess up the environment that we're in. They can contaminate the product that is being produced from us. And then in order to basically qualify for an archetype, the species that's using it has to be vibrating at the same frequency of the archetype. So you have all kinds of archetypes. We're talking about the predator, but there's the archetype of the healer. You know, there's a shamanic archetype. There's all kinds. And so when you take on that archetype, in order for you to come into this reality, you have to then be predisposed. Okay. And so you have to be vibrating at the same frequency. And I use in the paper, to simplify things, I talk about the species that uses this archetype as a plasma entity, which that goes along with electromagnetics. And it's very easy to understand if something is plasma based. And so if something's plasma based, when they come into our reality, they have to then put on a wetsuit. Very similar to what we use when we traverse into the aquatic realms. You know, we have to protect our skin. We have to have air breathers and fins, all these different things. When we're going into that reality, the aquatic reality, I say that the plasma entities that come into our reality, they have to protect themselves as well, which is why we don't see them lingering around as much. Sometimes they come and go. If they do linger, they only seem to stay for a specific amount of time. And so maybe it's they have to go back to their reality to almost come up for air type of thing, or, you know, change out their air breathers like we do.
Well, I think also that there's a two-way process here. So they're vulnerable in the same way that we're vulnerable. So they're vulnerable to psychic intrusion in the same way that we are. And you actually see that in a lot of UFO cases and also folklore cases. That's something that I'm going to be looking at in my book, Invisible Kingdom. So I came across very recently Dan Sherman, and he was in the military and he trained to use technology to telepathically communicate with aliens. And he was saying that the aliens refer to humans as water humans or water vessels. So again, I think that's kind of
so cool.
But it's kind of interesting what you were saying in terms of the aquatic metaphor, because it just reminded me of that. So their environment is very different. And as I said, I've got a friend, Anthony Beckett, and he's actually really into the plasma idea. And he talks about this idea that plasma is intelligent, or that it can be intelligent. It's very similar to the neurons within the brain. And again, a lot of people say that plasma are the Djinn, or is connected to the phenomenon of the Djinn. I think that it definitely is connected, like what you're saying, to electromagnetism, to electrons specifically, if we're being very specific about this, and the nature of waveform reality.
Yeah, and I do go into, maybe we could touch upon that if we do another show. I didn't include that in here, but I actually have graphs that show this weaving, and in comparison with you know, more of a, I have a weaving image, and then I have a quantum physics type of image, but we'll save that for another time. But yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up that they look at us as water beings, because one of the theories that I have in the paper is that our environment is an etheric ocean. And I do compare it to, just like I stated, the way in which we interact and are vulnerable within the aquatic realms. They are exactly the same within our reality. And our reality is an etheric ocean that's comprised of electromagnetic currents and cymatic waves. And probably get into that. And
I kind of think it's also what we're dealing with, which is connected to earthquakes and elasticity as well. That's something that I've been looking at and been writing about very recently. There are ideas which I'm developing at the moment, but I think that the ideas are very complementary to what you're talking about.
All right, I'm going to go. The next slide, it breaks down this technology that I'm talking about, and I go into the avatars that are extended down from this predatory archetype, and then the rules of engagement that are connected to each avatar. And with each avatar comes a license. And that license is where, you know, it shows the rules of engagement. And the portion that's highlighted and bolded in green, Pierre, I only put these three bullet points of avatars in the paper But as I was, when I was creating these slides, I came up with a fourth one for this information specific to your research. And that avatar would be called Cage and Pen. And I'll get to that in a second. I was really excited when I came up with that. And I was literally working on this page this morning, trying to update it because I had this idea while I was showering. And so these 4 bullet points are the avatars in which the entity that comes through, that qualifies to come through this predatory archetype technology. It's it's approved. It can come in here. It has to function in 4 ways. There's probably way more avatars than this, but we're just going to talk about these 4. And the first 3 are specific to the missing 411 phenomenon. That's where I came up with these ideas, because I was looking at the sophisticated behavior patterns that I was seeing within missing 411 and time storms. And the first one I call the sink or swim, because it's an entity that would have to qualify for that would have to be vibrating at the frequency of a shaman or a sorcerer, because they initiate almost an earth initiation protocol that's like an earth initiation. And I give 3 examples: Paul Eno, Jerry Marzinski, and Sherry Sweeney. All 3 of them were initiated by this predatory archetype and came out as a new and improved 2.0 version of them. They were able to instinctually and intuitively tap into gifts and talents that were hidden, those mystery school teachings that I was talking about earlier, that were hidden within their DNA, in order to reorder the chaotic environment that they found themselves in. So they brought order to chaos, and they were able to survive the exchange with the predator. The second example is of one of these licensed avatars is catch and release. That would be very similar to an angler or a scientist from human perspectives, in which we tag, we track, we monitor animals, or we fish for fun. And the next one is snatch and grab. That is going to be very similar to the behavior patterns that we see with humans when they hunt, a scientist or a bounty hunter type of situation. And the reason why I say that is because there is no return policy when it comes to this scenario. So the predatory species that comes in and that is allowed to use the snatch and grab license, they are allowed to take a human and not bring them back. Okay, they're given permission to do that. With the catch and release, they're given permission to, take us and bring us back. And then with the sink or swim, they're given permission to work with somebody to put them through an initiation. And then specific to your research, I came up with the term cage and pen. And this would be a species that would be vibrating at the frequency of an architect, an engineer, or somebody that's what, like the human equivalent would be a construction worker, because they terraform our reality. They terraform it so that it benefits them. And because they can't come here and stay for very long, just like we can't, go to the aquatic realm and stay very long, they then have to work through us to do this terraforming. And in order to do that, they have to influence us. Then through this technology, they almost use us as puppets to rearrange our environment so that it benefits them. And your work depicts that perfectly, in my opinion. And your work, as well as Carlos Castaneda, you guys show how it's done through economics, politics, medicine, religion, academics. We are in these pens. We're segregated. We're put in these situations where you can get, if you look at it from a corporate perspective, you're getting different products from each of these different areas based on the needs of the customers. And who are the customers? The predatory species that are feeding off of us, or they're running scientific experiments off of us. They're learning from doing things to us, with us, engaging with us. So it's like a farm, it's a school, it's a lab, this reality, all in, you know, in one place. You can do it all here. All bets are off. Anything goes. But even in those circumstances, you still have to adhere to certain rules and regulations because we have to maintain control. You know, that's what they're saying is we have to maintain control because your research has shown that this has been going on for thousands of years, and it was established thousands of years ago, and it's still running today because they were able to maintain control through these technological, archetypal, behavioral patterns.
Yeah,
very
very
good.
Good.
Questions on that?
Well, no, when you were talking about the manipulation of the environment, I was instantly thinking about the fluoridation of water.
Yes.
And I've been involved in campaigning against fluoridation of water. And so I kind of thought that it was very interesting that you could view it from a metaphysical perspective, particularly in terms of the predator. But yeah, I think that was a really good summary. And I'm in total agreement. I think it is complex. And there are a number of different things going off, and there are different types of behaviors. There are different types of patterns. And again, it's kind of at one level, it's indicative of lots of different things which are happening, but it's almost like that the technology is pretty consistent. So whatever it is, it seems to be electro. So for example, if let's say we are dealing here, and we are dealing here with both interdimensional and metaphysical beings, but we're also dealing with possibly, for example, in terms of UFO technology, that they could be using plasma or the electrical universe in ways which interdimensional entities are using. And so I think there's lots of different patterns, and it's a matter of trying to establish what these correlations are and document them very accurately, as what you've done. So that's good.
Yeah, and I have an example here. I did these slides right before our call, so hopefully they're okay. But I'm gonna take one of these, I call them sectors. So there's economics, there's an economic, political, medical, religious, academic. I'm gonna take the medical sector, and this should go along with what you were talking about with the fluoride, okay? So I'm going to take within the medical sector, this is how they terraform. This is an example. So we're going to start off with the archetype of the healer, okay? And then the avatar that's going to come down from the healer would be, the modern avatar would be doctor, okay? And then the rules of engagement in order to, for a human being to operate as doctor, you have to have a medical license. That's the rules of engagement. And then I'm going to show you an example of how the predator, or this other aspect, these controllers, they manipulate these archetypes in order to terraform us to produce the outcome that's beneficial to them. And so the next slide is, I'm going to show you what a forced manifestation of the archetype of a healer looks like, and then what the authentic manifestation of the archetype looks like. So let me go to that real quick. This is a man named Dr. Paul Saladino. He calls himself the Carnivore MD. I follow the carnivore movement because I healed my psoriasis through this diet. So that's why I'm very familiar with this man. I'm familiar with the movement. And I title this the archetypal alchemical transformation, the burning of the lab coat. And I call it that because I feel like I burned my corporate suit. The alchemical transformation that I went through that took about 10 years, I call it the burning of the corporate suit. So this guy is the burning of the lab coat. Now, this is a picture of him on the left. It's a promotional picture that he took when he was within the forced archetypal manifestation of what doctor is. Okay, this is the modern version of it, and this is the false version of healer. Okay, this is what the predatory aspect of this reality wants us to think healer looks like. All right, And when I look at pictures of somebody before and after, I'll look at it as a tarot card. Okay. You need to look at the body language. Look at the body language in the picture on the left. Both of these men, this is the same guy, both of them are still licensed. Both of them practice medicine. You can see the alchemical transformation that occurred. This is what Dr. Saladino looks like now on the right. Okay. He is still practicing medicine. He is still seeing patients in a very different way. The guy on the left, what I love about his body language in this picture versus the other picture is, even though his lab coat is open, he's showing you he's a very open individual. He's there to help you. He's opening up his organs. You know, that's our sensitive area. He's being sensitive to your situation. He's there to help you. His hands are tied. What you can't see, both of his hands are in his pocket. I tried to make it bigger or smaller, but anyway, so just trust me, his hands are in his pocket. What he's telling me is, in this forced version, this false version of what the archetype of healer is supposed to look like, as doctor is tying his hands. Okay. He's very stuffy. He's very, you know, he's got a tie around his neck, which is the symbol of a noose. Right. And he's, even though he's smiling and he's open, you can see in just the whole entire picture of it, his hands are tied. He's not able to manifest the correct archetype of healer through the vessel using this false and forced portrayal of it. And now fast forward to where he's at now. He's gone through the alchemical transformation. He's healed his body using the carnivore diet. He's then used that diet to heal patients. And now he understands what the accurate, authentic version of the archetype of the healer should look like when it is correctly processed in and on and through a human vessel. He is now outside of the medical establishment. He goes back and forth between Costa Rica, where he surfs a lot, and he does a podcast. He does remote consultations. So he goes back and forth between Costa Rica and Texas. And in Texas, he developed a supplemental line that is based off of desiccated animal products. So organs, you know, all types of organs. The supplements that he has in his hands here, that is animal fat in capsule form. And so what I see in this picture is, which you can't see, he is in his bare feet. He has stripped off his professional clothes. He probably burned his lab coat because he's over it at this point. And he understands how to heal a human vessel based on what his ancestors probably stepped forward and taught him how to do. This is what the archetype of the healer should look like. This is what it looked like to our ancestors. It did not look like the man on the left. It looks like this man on the right. He's very grounded in his perspective because he is barefoot on the ground. He has completely almost, I mean, he's in board shorts. That's it. The man is stripping down and showing you that he is very authentic. He's showing you his abs. He's showing you his healthy body. And so he's not only talking the talk, he's walking the talk at this point. And instead of his hands being tied, they are presenting you what he has discovered. It's fascinating to see the transformation of this man before and after. And I equate this coat, the lab coat, as a false talisman. And the reason why I say that is because the average person is programmed. When they see this lab coat, they know this is authority. At least they're programmed to think this is an authority figure. It doesn't matter if he's telling you inaccurate information. You are to listen to him. He's dressed up. There's been studies that show when children are told information by somebody in a suit versus somebody that looks like this guy on the right, they will follow the man in the suit 100% of the time, because we have been programmed to see this man on the left as being the authority figure and the one that's in charge. Meanwhile, the man on the right is more in charge of his life and more in charge of taking proper responsible possession of the archetype of the healer in the way in which that archetype is supposed to be accurately manifested within this reality through a human vessel. And so what I love about this is nothing has changed about this guy. He still has his license. He's still practicing medicine. He understands it from a different perspective. He swapped out the prescription pad for, you know, an ancestrally appropriate diet. And it's fascinating to watch all of these doctors within the keto and the carnivore movement going in this direction. And it's not just, you know, family physicians, it's cardiologists, it's thoracic surgeons, you know, heart surgeons, it's OBGYNs, it's orthopedic surgeons. There are so many doctors that are making this alchemical transformation that it's going to be something that swells from the ground up. It's going to be a grassroots movement, and you're going to see more of this, in my opinion. If I was to put money on it, I would bet all my chips would be in on this is the way medicine's going to go in the future. And it's actually going back to what it used to be, if you think about it.
Yeah, I just think with what's happened over the last couple of years, then it's forced a lot of doctors to basically reevaluate their trust within the system.
Yes.
So so I agree. I concur.
Yeah. And this is just a good micro view of how we are macro, you know, terraformed. So, you know, this guy went through the medical establishment, and he was taught the way in which the, I guess you want to say, powers that be want him to participate within the reality based on what benefits them, not what benefits us. And so this is a good depiction of that terraforming that I was talking about, and how they do it through these institutions or these sectors that you've identified. And then how does that look within the individual? And then you can understand how different your treatment would be based on the false archetype or the authentic archetype. And so that, I thought that was a perfect example of how to bring everything full circle based on your research and what I put in the paper, what I personally experienced, and what I see going on out in the real world. You know, not just something that I've read, but something that I've witnessed myself. And this is a little bit into how I think about things. So, the couple of slides that I have, there's 4 slides left. Like I said, I didn't do slides on the whole entire paper, but what I can talk about next is the consultation that I did with a man named Phoenix Aurelius. He is the owner and founder of the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy, and he specializes in this machine that's pictured here. It's an intrinsic data field analyzer, which is radionics. And this is the SE5 2000. It's one of the most updated version. And you can get more information on it at se-5.com. And Don Paris is the man that is now almost the authority on it, and he makes them and sells them. And I did a show with Phoenix that's on my YouTube channel, Metaphysical Mining, because I have a really hard time explaining how this works and what exactly it is. So I just interviewed Phoenix and said, you know, you're the expert in this. You are the right person to talk about it. But the way in which I describe it is, in my opinion, and Phoenix said that it was a good explanation, so I'm going to use it here, that in the paper I put, it's like a reality or a lie detector test for our reality. And when you ask it questions, what it does is it bumps that information up against the truthfulness of it, of that question being true within our reality based on the laws and rules and regulations that govern our reality. And so that's why I call it a lie detector test for our reality. And I used it as that, pretty much like that. I just grabbed some quotes here that I pulled directly from Don Paris's website that could help describe it if somebody doesn't have time to go and listen to the interview with Phoenix. but it deals with subtle energies and biofields and the intelligences and the information that's within the field around us. And somebody like Rupert, is it Rupert Sheldrake? He calls it the morphogenic field, and Lynn McTaggart calls it the field. Mainstream pop culture would call it the matrix. So all of these different descriptions that we're using, they're all describing the same thing, this intrinsic data field that's around us, this metaphysical surrounding that a psychic taps into. And, I was talking with Phoenix and I said, I almost feel like the psychics are living versions of this machine. And he said, that's exactly, that's a very good explanation, that when somebody is a very powerful and gifted psychic, they essentially are an SE5-2000. So if that gives anybody kind of an idea of how it functions, IDFs are part of the linking medium between particles, the use of dowsing rods and by government industry to locate underground wires and tunnels is an example of IDF interaction. And I thought that was, a lot of us can understand dowsing rods. Let's see. And so the way in which we used this machine was, I had about 200 questions, and it took us hours and hours and hours because this is a very tedious process. And the way in which we used it is kind of unconventional to use it for academic purposes. It's normally used for farming, for analyzing the environment, for farmers, looking at the landscape, trying to tweak the minerals and stuff within the ground. And so it analyzes stuff like that. But then they also use it for medical reasons. And those are the main uses. And Phoenix talks about that as well on the show that I did with him. But for our purposes, the way we used it was asking it these, these questions that are very hard to answer. All of these metaphysical questions are just things that it could take you a lifetime to understand, just even one of the questions. So we were looking at something very nebulous. And in order for him to consult with me, the machine itself, the SE5-2000 can be used on its own, or it can be used in conjunction with a computer. And so he took the 200 questions that I had over the 3 sessions that we did, which took hours, and he would have to manually type everything in, or he would copy and paste it. And so the whole process is very tedious. And he had to come up, he uses this numerical calibration where when he would type in the question, the IDF machine would do its things, and it would spit out a numerical range. And 0 to 40 was no, it was not accurate. Maybe was 41 to 70, and 71 to 100 is yes. The closer you get to 100 is definitely you are 100% on point. And so I gave an example of, this is in the introduction of the paper, and this should be a pretty good example of how we used it. And we were talking about, oceans and how our environment is an etheric ocean. When the predator looks at our environment is the same way that we look at the aquatic ocean, except we're an etheric ocean. And I wanted to, I noticed online when I was doing my research, there's 3 ways that you can spell ether. The E-T-H-E-R, A-E, where, it's smushed, and then the A-E-T-H-E-R, where the A and the E aren't smushed. And I wanted to know, is there even a difference? And we were so fascinated to find out that, yeah, it does make a difference in this reality, whether using the accurate definition or the accurate word for something. And so that's why I wanted to share this. So when we ran these questions through the IDF machine, it showed that the spelling ether and ether, where it's not using the ligature, those were the same, but they were not the same as when the ether is spelled with the ligature, which is where that's the the term where you join the two letters to form a glyph or whatever. And I put that down there on the slide. But so that's what was so fascinating about using this machine, because it helped me pinpoint the terms that I had put in the paper to find the most accurate one I could find to use. And then once we realized that they were different, then we asked the question, is the etheric ocean a more accurate term to describe humanity's world from the perspective of the predators as defined by Michelle? And that's how specific you have to get when you ask these questions. And it was boom, 100, it was spot on. So I felt very comfortable in moving forward with my etheric ocean analogy. You have any questions on that?
No, when I was reading the paper, I was really intrigued, and I was thinking, what type of device is this? So you've kind of answered that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I'll probably end up interviewing Don Paris, because I have used the machine through Don Paris for almost medical reasons. And he has I'll give you the link for it that you could put in the description where people can get information on it, but he does research and you can participate in this research. And I did, myself and my husband, I put us through about 6 months worth of the process that he uses for this research, where it reprograms your data field. And you can ask it, he has all these different programs that you can run for you personally. And I forget how many there are. There's a number of them. And each month you can pick each week what you want your intrinsic data field to be, sorry, there was a bug there, to be programmed to almost like the frequency change to become in line with whatever this programming is that he has set. So one of them was, you know, I wanted to get better at like being a better like CEO or an entrepreneur. And so he could program the space around you to align with that frequency. And I did that one week. The next week I would do where I wanted to tap into the health of my body. The next week I would do where I wanted to tap into the health of maybe spirituality or psychology. And so he has these different programs, and you can, for, I forget how much it is. It's not very much, maybe like $50 or $100 a month. They will do that with you, and you have to send them a picture. It's really an interesting experience. I'll give you a link for it, and I highly recommend it for people just to test it and to help him with this research. And now the reason why I chose an ocean like analogy or metaphor for the way in which our worlds are perceived is because of the missing 411 maps. These maps come with, and I'm sorry it's blurry, I just wanted to use it for in comparison to this other map up here. And really, I just need you to focus on the dots, essentially, you know, the pegs that are in there. So the picture, the image that I have up top, that is I live on the Gulf of Mexico, and that's popular fishing spots. And, you know, anglers use this to find those areas, and they're plotted. And, you know, you can put that into your GPS and you can go to that fishing spot. Well, look at how similar it is to the missing 411 map. These are all the case studies and the clusters that David Paulides reveals in the Missing 411 series. And you can see how there's these concentrations of areas, and then down the middle of the United States, there's nothing. And what's interesting is the majority of these clusters, they can be found around water. And so I just wanted to show the comparison of what his maps look like in comparison to how we hunt and fish. We do the same things. And that's where I really, when I saw this, I knew that there had to be some kind of link between the archetypes and the avatars that I just discussed. This shows we may be seeing hunting grounds. So, any questions on that?
Well, I was just thinking, certainly if you look at the left image, the lines appear to be quite straight, and I was wondering if they were linked into tectonic stress lines in some way, but maybe that's just been a little bit too lateral.
Are you looking at which one? Are you looking at the
The top picture.
Okay, the fishing spots. Yeah, I'd have to send you the link to where I got that from, because yeah, it's showing the currents. I think that's what.
But I also think that, like what you're saying, that there is definitely a correspondence with water vapor and portals. I think this is definitely established within folklore and within tradition. So it's not incompatible with my own research, which I've done.
Yeah, and I give examples of how the other disciplines, Josephine McCarthy, she's a magician, and she talks about how water is used as a portal. Carl Jung, I have quotes from some of his books, even though he's talking about it from a psychological aspect, it's really eerie to see the quotes that I put in there, because you could almost, it could almost be real life of what he's talking about. And especially when you layer it in with the other disciplines that I used within the paper, all the other researchers. But there's just one last slide that, this is almost the spectrum in which, like the predator spectrum versus our spectrum. And this is the electromagnetic spectrum, obviously. And then the rainbow section of it is what humans visually see, and everything outside of that we can't see. And so this is where the predator then kind of works from this other aspect of reality that we can't tap into. And this was a example that I pulled from Jerry Marzinski's book, and this is from a physicist that came up with this information and talks about how we only perceive a teeny tiny little bit of our reality. And it would make sense that there would be, all this space that they could operate in, these predators. They could come in through all these different waves, these electromagnetic currents and cymatic waves, and they can just travel on them. Again, I have a lot more graphs and information within the paper that corresponds to all this. I just wasn't quite sure how much we could get through, and I didn't want it to be so overwhelming. So I can always come back and talk about some of the more technical side of it, and show the graphs.
Yeah,
anything on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think electromagnetic energy is really the key to understanding this phenomenon. And I think once we break that, I think people like Tesla were beginning to ask the right types of questions. I'm guessing we already have a lot of information on this, but a lot of this will be covert and will be linked into the military, unfortunately. Whereas this should really be public knowledge. But unfortunately, we've got the suppression of knowledge. So
yeah, someone that I'm going to start doing a lot of research on is Walter Russell. He is, the little bit that I've learned about him and his research is spot on with all of this information that we just talked about. And I'm going to go down, that's my next rabbit hole that I'm going to go down.
Is he the guy who wrote the book about light? Or
I believe so, yes. Yeah, I don't have it where it's handy, but yeah, I have a couple of the books written down that I need to read. And I got The Electric Universe. I have that book, and I have Immanuel Velikovsky. I have that book I have to get into. They're all basically along the same topic, genre of this, electrical type universe, and how it functions, and how our ancestors understood this technology and how it's been suppressed. And so that's where I'm at for my PhD. We're kind of getting into the work that I'm doing for my PhD, but that was the deepest I've ever gone in a presentation.
No, that was excellent.
On the paper.
Can I just ask you quickly about your PhD?
Sure. Oh yeah.
What's the topic you're writing for your PhD?
Well, I covered a lot of it when we were talking about the blood and bones. And I'm really going to look at all aspects of the human vessel and how it's a technology. and how it's being used across a lot of sectors. Specifically, you talked about the military. And a perfect example of that would be remote viewing, and how remote viewing can be used by the every average day individual. And it is something in which it's the way in which we operate and function, and it's been suppressed. And the United States military started a program with the Stanford Research Institute. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were two physicists that they hired and worked in conjunction with Ingo Swann, who was a very powerful psychic. And they developed the controlled remote viewing program. And it was something that ran up until supposedly the mid-90s, when it was canceled, which usually is code word for it went black projects. Because something, you know, that I have corresponded with some of the men that were in that program, one being Lynn Buchanan, and I've read his book. And he stated that in his book that every year they had to prove to another representative from the government, had to come in and approve them for a budget. And they said they were one of the few programs that had to go through this rigorous, you know, protocol every year to prove that what they were doing was authentic and it was working. And Hal Puthoff, I forget which one, Hal Puthoff or Russell Targ, states that what they would do is whenever this government bureaucrat would come in and say, I don't believe that, you know, this is hocus pocus, they would sit them down and they would say, we don't have to show you how we do it, you're going to do it. And they would sit down with the person and they would actually remote view. And every year they did that, they were awarded the money to continue doing the program. So you can't tell me that something like that is going to be shut down. That totally went black projects. And that's an example, just one example of something that will be in my PhD, in which it shows that we are a technology, and some aspects of our reality, the people that are in the know, they know how to switch us on and switch us off. And it's really that simple. But it's not that simple at the same time. So it's very complex. But that's just one example of something that will be featured in the paper, and that I go down the rabbit hole of technology and how the human vessel, as well as consciousness, is a technology.
Okay, I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much. And for, you know, thank you for coming on and for giving me a presentation of your MA. Is there anywhere where anybody can read your thesis? Is it available publicly, or is it just in the domain of the university?
It's on academia.edu. And you can, I have a link tree. The best way to get, if somebody wanted to reach out to me, is through Instagram. I'm at Michelle.DeVrieze. And I have a link tree there that has, it's very easy, you know, just click, and then you can get to my paper, but it's academia.edu. And that's where you could go to find me, is Instagram, and then there.
Okay, well, if you send me all your links and details, then I will put that on the descriptions, and anyone who's interested in speaking to you directly can actually contact you. Okay,
that would be, yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for inviting me on. This has been a blast. And
I do recommend actually that everybody reads this paper, because it's really, really good. It is a very good deconstruction of the predator consciousness and what that means. So thank you for spending your time, because it's been a couple of hours.
Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot, and I really appreciate the feedback that you've given me on the paper. And I really appreciate you allowing me to come on and present like this. Every time I compile a presentation, I learn a little bit more and I understand more about how to explain it, because this is a complex topic that can at times be dark, but it's better to shine the light on it so that people are aware from a self-defense perspective how to you know, defend themselves if they do find themselves in front of something like this type of predator.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.